turning discomfort into your weapon.
Failure still gives us insights. Failure still gives us information about what's true or what works and what doesn't work. You either win or you fail is like binary thinking. The only way to get to where you want to go is to be honest about where you're currently at. So if your identity is down here, but your capabilities are all the way up here, that's like imposter.
Tired of leadership that feels like Groundhog Day? CEOs, founders, I want all of you to listen up. This episode rips the status quo to shreds. Our guest, Arielle Lechner, she's coached leaders at Google, GitHub, Peloton, and she's about to drop some truth bombs on turning discomfort into your weapon. Trusting your gut in a data-obsessed world, that's controversial. We're going to get to that one. And finally, tackling the real problems holding you back. If you're ready to lead differently, your journey starts now. Thank you, Arielle, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. What an intro.
Arielle, you coach leaders who are kind of fed up with the status quo. What does that status quo typically feel like for a CEO? What do you define status quo also to?
Yeah, well, I guess the way I define status quo is just the vanilla, the standard way of how things have been going. And I think for CEOs, or at least the clients I work with who are exploring and want to have coaching, they're fed up with it. And what does being fed up feel like? Well, it's frustration. And why are you frustrated? There's a sense that things are not working. There's a stuckness to it. And, at least if you're exploring coaching, there's a desire to change that, to create something different.
I feel like whenever somebody gets fed up, they have to get to that point. Is it, because it's so dry, like, especially like if you're dealing with, and you've dealt with Fortune 500 companies, when you're dealing with that, we do that, from our startup, we have to, basically talk up to, VPs of product managers and stuff like that. What do you feel like, are they tired of the corporate minutia? Is that the status quo? Or do they feel like their position has them so they can't move? Like, what do you think that is in detail?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I mostly work with CEOs at startups, and then I've worked with leaders at bigger companies. So I think it's also different. It's different depending on the person, the role, the company, and the context. But typically, actually, the way I've seen it is it's not necessarily the corporate minutia. It's if you're running a team, it's the way your team is operating that is just it's not hitting. It's not at the level you need. Or you're maybe as a leader feeling like I don't have the actual time and capacity to devote to these big strategic initiatives, and I don't have control or you don't feel like you have control over your schedule, because you do have control over your schedule. So it's things like that where they are just wanting a change, and it's usually around performance, either their personal performance as a leader or team performance, at least is what I've seen.
Where do you think that comes from? Like for me, I was grabbing a cup of coffee this morning and I started to feel that pressure of like, shit, I don't have clarity. Like I don't how do I gain clarity? And then I grabbed my little journal and I started writing things out and kind of looking at my schedule. What does that look like? Especially for because we have a lot of tech leaders listening to this and founders. Is it getting into like discomfort and embracing that? Is it understanding, is it understanding you as a kid and never feeling good enough? And that's why you're an entrepreneur? Like, what is it?
Folks with a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah. That's a lot of us.
Well, here's what I have mostly seen. So clarity can't, in my point of view, you cannot think your way to clarity. So how do you get to clarity then? Well, there's very few things in life and in business, I believe, that are true. Meaning just because something worked for someone else, just because a playbook worked elsewhere, doesn't mean it's going to work here. And so the only way to figure out what's true for you and your team, your company, is to run experiments. Now, what is an experiment? Okay, you have a hypothesis or a hunch and you want to test something. So this is, I don't know, I did this in high school. Like, how do you create an experiment? Well, there's like a container. Like, what is the container for this experiment? What are the variables that go into it? And how will you measure success? Like, what's the is a certain amount of time or whatnot. And then, what does success look like? And then what is a suboptimal result? And so an experiment can be a super small experiment, or it could be a bigger experiment, right? That's something you're looking over the span of like 3 to 6 months. But generally speaking, these experiments that you're running for yourself, for your team at your company, are what give you the insights you need or the clarity you need to figure out what the next step is.
Is that why a lot of people aren't, especially like leaders, they're not willing to, because when there's discomfort, you could take extreme discomfort, like it's someone that they're having to deal with on the C-suite that they're having issues with, and they don't want to have that conversation, to, just, I don't know how to see clarity. I like what you said though, like you can't think your way into clarity. That's really interesting. How do you embrace discomfort? Because, and I know you have a concept turning discomfort into your competitive edge. Can you share like an example or something like a strategic advantage on this?
What I've seen, I mean, we all face discomfort, especially when we're leaders or we're trying to build something new, right? We're doing things we haven't done before or things that maybe just make us uncomfortable. And when I say turn your discomfort into a competitive edge, what I mean by that is rather than thinking, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable around this, or I want to avoid this, and it makes you want to push it away, reframing it as I'm noticing I have resistance here or discomfort around this thing I need to do. That is the sign or the signal that this is exactly what needs my attention right now. And the sooner we can act on that, the sooner we are going to generate an insight or increase our velocity of learning. And by the way, I believe increasing your velocity of learning is one of the most important things you can do to increase your chances of winning. And it's one of the things, I mean, there's very, very little things we have control over in business, right? Like the market, competitors, all this stuff. What we do have control over is how quickly are we enabling ourselves and our teams to learn through experimentation and whatnot. So I really believe turning this discomfort into a competitive edge, what that means is, okay, when I'm feeling discomfort, boom, that's exactly what I'm going to turn my attention towards because that is a sign that that needs my attention right now. And as leaders, we're often, or at least I see with clients, there's so many things that are vying for our attention at any given point, and it can be overwhelming or hard to figure out what is the best use of my time right now. And I've often found with clients the things that we are avoiding or dragging our feet on, that's what needs our attention right now.
It's kind of procrastination with the discomfort feeling and then just kind of being a victim to it that is allowing this. I want to get into what you just said, the velocity of learning. That's really interesting. I like those words. As somebody that has a learning mindset, I mean, we have a podcast self-aware leader and we're on Turtle here. That's our whole thing. Emotional intelligence. I forgot the book she wrote. But what do you mean when you use the word velocity? That's a cool word.
Yeah, maybe I get that from just my background in tech, but velocity, I just mean like the speed through which you're learning. And to go back to this concept, what I was talking about with experiments, well, the quicker you can run your experiments or the more experiments you can run. And I should also say that your experiments need to have, as long as you're running tight experiments with quick feedback loops, there is no such thing as failure. There are only lessons. So those lessons, whether it came from a suboptimal outcome or a great outcome, are the information you then need to take the next step. And the more you can get that flywheel spinning and get that velocity going, the more you learn, the faster you learn. That is a real competitive advantage. And especially I would say, especially with startups, or if you're starting some brand new venture within a company, that is what you need to lean on because it's so ambiguous and there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, that's so good. And one of the things that you talk about, and you have an idea about your hunches enough. Now, as far as tech leaders, data is everything. I mean, that's what we do at Tartle. It's all about data. So in this data heavy world, what is that with intuition?
Yeah, I think especially leaders, CEOs, I mean, these are typically high performing people. One might even say sometimes they have like perfectionist tendencies. And people, it's great that we have so much data these days. It's wonderful. And also we can get lost in the weeds of data, or we can be waiting for perfect data, or get just overwhelmed with all the data. And that slows us down, which again, I really believe we want to block the things that are slowing us down. And so if we go back to this concept of experiments, what does an experiment start with? Well, a hypothesis. Hypothesis, hunch, whatever language you want to use, it's the same thing. And you want to test it. Okay, I'm having a hunch. And by the way, a hunch, a hypothesis, that's not something we typically like that comes out of our ass. We've seen a pattern somewhere, or we've seen things enough times where we have this knowing, this hunch that this might be the thing, but we don't know for sure. And so we can run a quick experiment around that. And when I say experiment, again, it can be this quick thing. Like for the next 2 weeks of this sprint, I'm going to see what it's like to, if we were having a weekly stand up that was 30 minutes, I'm going to see what happens if we cut it to 15 minutes. It can be something so small and minute as that, or it can be an experiment like, we're going to change over the course of the quarter, we're going to shift our sales process and like see if that can shorten the sales cycle. So it's these hunches I guess to come back to your question, these hunches we don't need to wait for this perfect analysis. We can oftentimes use this hunch to get more information to move us forward with imperfect data and still get the insights we need to figure out what's next.
Yeah, and I know with your, putting this into containers and doing experiments, this is the think like a scientist mindset. What happens when there's failure? I know you mentioned it's learning. There's still a like a fear of that because especially if you're, like no matter even if you're a CEO or founder, you're answering to the investors. See,
Totally.
so how do you overcome this fear of failure or being wrong? Like that's a big one too with ego.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll speak to the failure piece first. So, I think reframing, I mean, you either win or you fail. First and foremost is like binary thinking. It's either one or the other. It's all or nothing. And that is just not it's not the truth. And if we can start if we're looking for the truth and if we're looking for things that will move us and our company forward, it's much more true to say failure still gives us insights. Failure still gives us information about what's true or what works and what doesn't work. And again, coming back to as long as we are not being sloppy with our experiments, as long as we are running tight experiments with quick feedback loops, those failures are just more information that moves us closer to the thing we actually want to create. And even if, I don't know, you tested something for a quarter and it was like a colossal fail, if you can go to your board, I mean, ideally, you haven't overinvested in something that you can't really tolerate. But if you go to your board and say this failed, but these are the insights we now have for this next thing we're going to test, that's a productive conversation.
I like to think like a scientist because it takes the emotional part out of it. That makes
Exactly.
sense.
Totally. I mean, I say this to my clients all the time. What part of, and maybe this goes back to the ego piece you brought up. When something fails, especially as a leader, we think, oh, I'm wrong or I'm bad or I'm not enough. We make up a story about what that means about us versus, I'm not a scientist, but I've like read enough books and watched enough TV where, a great scientist, they're constantly running experiments. And when an experiment doesn't work out, they don't go, oh shit, like, screw this whole career. I suck. Let's just throw in the towel. No, they go, oh, interesting. Like what parameters here do I need to change or what variable was incorrect here? And let me use that failure and like run the experiment again. And they don't make it mean something about the quality, about their ability to be a good scientist. And that objectivity, I think, is really powerful. And again, increases your ability to turn towards the discomfort, run more experiments. And I really think if we can adopt more of that scientist mindset as leaders, it really benefits us and our companies.
I agree with you 100%. It's something I've had to learn over the years. Oh, it's all about me. Oh, I'm a piece of shit. You're basically being narcissistic. You're making it all about you when it really has nothing to do with
Exactly.
you.
Exactly. I mean, there might be some part of it that does have to do with you, and it doesn't, again, if you believe it's also comes to this fix and growth mindset. Maybe there is something that could be improved on your end, but if you believe it can be improved, then great.
Yeah, no, that's so good because I like that statement because it takes all the bullshit out. Like, because especially in a room, if you're in a room with a group of maybe your team members or whatever, you could be like, we're just gonna think like a scientist here. None of this is personal, because data, and this is what we do for a living. A lot of times we see data, especially if you have an employee that's fearful. They may give you the data that they're not going to give you the right data. Like for me, marketing, they may skip an ad campaign, that didn't do that well, and they give you the ones that did well. And then if you're just macro looking at stuff, you're like, oh wow, this was great. So you can't really trust the data. So I think you're right about that. Like your intuition, unless you're pulling the data and going into each account and doing it, or you have like a dashboard that pulls it directly to you and no one can interfere with it. And then the whole thing about having too much data, it's like we're slammed. Like, how many dashboards do we need? How many Slack and email and everything else? And then on top of it, now we got, Claude and ChatGPT and, X and Grok and everything else. It's like way too much coming at us.
I like what you said too about like the real example of, hey, if this camp, people might not want to show the things that are not doing well or failing. And again, it's not just you as a leader, but if your employees also know and believe that, oh, if this campaign I ran did poorly, doesn't mean I'm bad. It's just I need to be able to explain to my boss why I think
Mhm.
that, or show some insights as to what led to this, then there's no fear or shame around that. And it's a more productive culture.
Yeah, no, I love that. A lot of people have misconceptions of how the military is. I was in the Marine Corps. And we used to run these experiments all the time. That's what you do in training. And I would try to tell like CEOs and other people, it's like, you need to do tons of training all the time, not boring training, but exciting training, But it's like we would do that over and over and over again. And none of us ever thought like stuff would 90% of the time, like a scientist, 90% of the time it wouldn't work out. But then we'd be like, oh, let's tweak this, let's tweak that, let's tweak this. Oh, okay, perfect. Now let's try it in a real world, like a real world mission and then see how it works. And then we all come back and debrief and we go over everything, what worked, didn't work, who, but no one took it personal like, unless somebody died or something. But, other than that, it was, and this was like intense and serious. This isn't like your ad campaign did shitty or not.
I actually love what you just said. You said it wasn't boring training, it was exciting training. And it made me think, huh, like, yeah, the term training, it definitely has like a boring undertone to it or
Mm.
connotation. But training can certainly be exciting. I love that. Even that was, I had a shift right there just listening to you.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of different generals and stuff like that, because it's kind of more one of the things that they talked about is having trust and shared consciousness. Which is funny. You don't think those words would come out of a general's, but and that's something that you talk about is coaching beyond accountability. And what questions might a leader ask themselves? Are their coach, if they're working with someone like you, like the root cause. I want to get kind of deep into this if you don't mind, because I feel like if we don't get to the root cause, we're just going to have upstream problems.
Yeah. Well, so I guess maybe first I'll explain like what I mean by upstream and downstream problems. So like the analogy I like to give is, you can be standing next to a river and you keep seeing kids who are drowning and you can keep jumping into the river to save these kids, or you can walk upstream and punch in the face whoever keeps throwing these kids in the river. And, oftentimes when we are a CEO or a leader, there are the presenting problems, or we might want to call them like symptoms. And then there are the upstream problems, like the root problems, meaning, if we could solve this bigger problem, all these other little problems would go away. I think one of the most important questions you can ask yourself as a leader to, say the same problem keeps happening, symptom or down, one powerful question that a leader can ask themselves in like a self-coaching capacity is, how did I create, promote, or allow this to become a problem?
Mm.
And the reason I like this question is it's asking you to reflect on what role you played in this. Even if that was a passive role where you just weren't paying attention, cool, you need to pay attention now. And that's the number one thing as a leader you want to look at. Like, what do I need to change about how I'm showing up here to create a shift? And sure, then you can work your way down and maybe there's other folks on the team and whatnot. But I really think that's an important question to be asking.
Yeah, I think that because it creates ownership and responsibility, and we want to shift that away or blame, if it wasn't for my CTO, then, he did this to me, and so it's kind of like, this is really interesting to me because like you said, with the kids analogy, that's so great. It's just, we're so busy. How do we get not where we pull the blinders off? Like we're not just watching the kids and running out there and just saving them, to exhaustion.
Yeah, and I think what's also tough about this is when we are stretched thin, when we find ourselves putting out fires all the time and we find ourselves in reactivity, it's very easy to just be like trying to, yeah, put out all the fires and just like try to fix whatever, plug the holes in the boat, so to speak. But as a leader, we want to be spending more time being strategic versus reactive. And that's easier said than done, right? Especially I've found like if you're a startup pre-product market fit, there's just, but the nature of that is you are putting out a lot of fires. There is a lot of reactivity oftentimes. Yeah, we want to be able to spend more time thinking about, if I've seen a fire happens, a problem happens once, cool. Well, let's react to that. If it keeps happening over and over again, we need to ask ourselves, how do we shift into being proactive or even better, strategic, right? We want to ask ourselves, what's really going on here? Like, what is at the crux of this? Why does this keep happening? And try to address that upstream problem so that these smaller fires stop happening.
Sometimes these smaller fires, and I think this will go right into your lift and thrust model. It provides a tangible way to like assess culture. Like we skip past that. Whenever we have a problem, it's so funny because I'll even do this. And I have to catch myself. It's like I almost need like a reminder to say, "Hey, what's the culture? What is the team feeling? How is everybody?" We just skip right to the problem and then how we can solve it in some formulaic code way. What is the lift and thrust model? And like the weight drag. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah. And by the way, this is not, I didn't coin this model. This is not my model. This is a model from a mentor of mine, Robert Ellis, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. But the gist of this model is I love it because you can use it for a lot of different things. You can use it on like a personal performance level, but you can also use it as a tool to assess like your culture and where it's at. So really quickly, like I'll run you through it. So on the Y axis, you've got lift at the top and weight at the bottom. And then on the X axis, you've got a drag and then you've got thrust.
Hmm.
And lift, you can think of lift as what are the things that are making me excited to come to work? Why do I feel good about work? And thrust, you can think of what are the things that are enabling me to do my best work, that are allowing me to grow. And on the opposite end, weight is like what's making me drag my feet, why I don't want to go to work, I'm not excited. And then drag is what are the things that are getting in the way of me doing my best work. And in a perfect world, your culture's like in that top right quadrant.
Right.
Realistically, we're not always there. And even if we have found ourselves there, we can like shift to different places on the graph depending on what's going on. And so I like this tool because, I've had clients use this at like an offsite, and it's a great kind of test to check in with like a team. Where do we feel like we are right now? What are things right now that are creating a lot of lift for us as a team or even as individuals? What are things going on right now that are creating a lot of thrust for us? And similarly, what's weighing us down right now? Like what is holding us down, making us not excited about what's going on? And then what's dragging us back? Like what are things that are getting in the way of us doing our best work? Let's name those things. Let's have an exercise around that. Like let's name all these little invisible kind of elephants in the room. And then once we name those things, the things that are holding us back or weighing us down, we can actually start to co-create a solution of what's going to move us tactically or more tangibly to that upright quadrant.
Yeah, no, because it's not just a diagnostic tool. It's designed for interventions or initiatives. So, and that's kind of what I thought, because I think a lot of times as leaders, we get so caught up into, diagnosing things that we're not looking at it in the sense of like, how's the well-being of my team? What's the forward momentum going on with this project?
Exactly. And I think it also, I really like using this tool. Like I think I used the word just now, like co-create a solution, right? Oftentimes, and I think maybe this happens more often in like larger orgs, but it's like, oh, we assume the problem or we think the problem is this, and we're going to come down with like a top down solution. And like sometimes that can be appropriate. But I think there's a lot of literature on this that when solutions are co-created and people feel and they get to participate and they feel like their challenges have been heard and listened to, there's much more buy-in. And then there's much more like energy towards making that change. So I really like it, that exercise of on offsites or whatnot, to just have people really name what's been holding them back, what's getting in the way, and then co-create that solution to move people up into the right.
Yeah, co-creating. So, like with my military example with teams, because those are high pressure situations, we were taught to, if someone's not talking, let's have them talk. Like we need to. So everybody's looking to see who's not engaged. And then if somebody's not engaged, we want to bring them in because everybody has to take ownership of it. They have to. Because if not, you're going to have a failure. Everybody has to feel like they're 100% involved. And that's so good. And that gets into communication. And I know you talk about communicating like a leader and, focusing on the 20% of the inputs that drive 80% of the results. I still want to kind of stay with this team analogy, but what does that look like? When you say 20% of the inputs, I know the 80-20 rule, we all know that, but what does that look like?
Yeah, so that looks like, so typically I'll have clients who come to me and they say, "Oh, I want to improve my executive communication." Great, right? Like, what is executive communication? Well, they want to maybe improve their body language, eye contact, pitch and tone of voice, all great things. And I think if we strip it back even further and we go back to basics, there's really, what I have seen is there's like a 20% of things you can do that's going to give you 80% of the results you're looking for. What are those things? Number one, speaking clearly, being clear, saying one key thing at a time. It sounds simple, but it's really, people don't do it. I myself struggle sometimes to do it. Being clear is a skill that, we can refine over a long period of time. The other thing is being explicit. So being explicit about what you actually mean, what you actually want to see if you're having a performance conversation with someone. It's incredible how often, again, because of discomfort, sometimes we beat around the bush or we don't say exactly what we mean. We compliment sandwich or whatever lingo. And the third thing is being direct. saying the most important thing first. Again, there's oftentimes when we're communicating, whether it's about company strategy or if the company hasn't been performing well, or we're having a one-on-one, a difficult one-on-one where we're maybe putting someone on like a performance improvement plan. We kind of beat around the bush, or we're avoiding saying the hard thing. And being direct means saying the most important thing that you can't like schedule the meeting for first. And so these three things, they're simple. They're not easy, but they're simple. And I think if we can, as leaders, if we can focus on, am I being clear? Am I being explicit? And am I being direct? Obviously, always with like with empathy, right? It doesn't mean being rude. We will improve our communication as executives astronomically. Like I've seen it so many times now that with just making these tweaks here, teams perform better, people understand their roles and responsibilities better, and they better understand what you want to see.
Yeah, it's so interesting because this high leverage communication, what you're talking about, and for me, it's kind of like when you really get and understand that 80% of the bullshit that you're saying, no one's paying attention to or listening. There's that whole nobody cares, work harder, type of mantra. And it sounds mean, but it's really cool because it's kind of like if I'm coming with my speech, because I always want to ask, like, is this going to benefit them? In what I'm going to say, or is this going to call out something in clarity that they're going to be able to respond back to me, or am I telling them something to do? And most of the time that's what it is. There's like an underlying, and with CEOs, that I've noticed a lot, and maybe you have too, there's kind of like this underlying, you're never good enough to all my employees because no one's working like me. You know what I mean? And so I'm asking you a question. And then when you talk to the employees, they're all like, I just feel pressure. Every time they ask me something, it's like, oh shit, how do you communicate? I know you use the word empathy and no one likes that word. It's the E word, but how do you communicate in this way where you're communicating like a leader, but it's high leverage, but then at the same time, you're creating ownership and showing empathy. It seems so hard.
It can be tricky for sure. I'm trying to think if I can maybe give like a more concrete example of what I mean. So maybe we'll use like an example of like feedback because leaders are always giving feedback, or ideally they're always giving feedback. So, let's say there's someone on your team who's like not performing well, and you don't want to hurt their feelings or, be an asshole about it. You can go in there and kind of say, I appreciate how hard you're working, this and that, and say, I would really like if this could be better, something like that. And listeners might hear that and say, oh, what's wrong with that? Like, that's something I've said. And like, you're saying you want them to do better. That sounds fine. But really, you're not really being, I don't think what's coming across there is like the severity or like how important this is. Like, this might
Mhm.
be the last straw before this person gets put on a pip and maybe exited, right? And if you're not bringing that like gravity to the conversation, you're doing them a disservice because they don't know like they're like two steps away from being booted. And that's not fair. And maybe said in a different way, it would be like, if you were to be direct and get right to it, it would be like, this quarter, you did not perform at the level at which we need, and explain exactly where the gap was. I think a way to be empathetic and also motivating is, I know you are capable of more. Here are these specific ways or examples in which I've seen it in the past. And we can maybe even here come back to the lift and thrust model. Like, is there drag or weight that's getting in the way of you operating at this level that I know you're capable of? And maybe let's co-create a plan to get you there. Very clear, very explicit, very direct, think very compassionate, but there's no confusion as to what
Mhm.
the problem is and what needs to happen.
I just had a conversation 10 minutes before we got on, this exact conversation with an employee. It was so interesting. And I said what you said. I don't know. I got lucky maybe, with saying it, but they're having problems. They're having to keep and this is interesting because it goes personal most of the time. So it has nothing to do really with their work. It's just they're struggling personally. So they were having an issue with they're having to take their brother now, and then he's having problems in school. So their brother just is living with them now because there's family issues. And so now they're adapting to the brother being in the house and then the school issue. So it's like, oh, okay. So now I can have empathy and be like, well, what are some changes that we can make? Like, can we change your schedule a little bit? Being in the tech world, do you want to work more at home? If as long as we get this project done, like,
Right.
so
Create
important what
now
you're
that
saying.
you have, yeah, well, you have the context now and you're willing to co-create a solution that works for both of you, right? Like you still have business goals that need to get met, but there are ways to get there that can be accommodating. perhaps to this person and what they're going through.
Yeah, it was so easy to do that, and then and then they were like, "Well, I'll get back with you. I don't want to like take advantage of you, because there was mutual respect there." What I want to get into imposter syndrome because we talk a lot about this on Self-Aware Leader. The inner game, leaders managing that. What are some of the things that you see with this intense self-criticism, the imposter syndrome in your coaching experience? What do you see with this?
I mean, everyone has it. If you feel like you're alone, even the top performers have this run in their minds from time to time. I think it's not a matter of getting rid of it permanently. It's how do I bring more awareness when this is happening, and how do I create space and not let this part of me be what's dictating my actions and behaviors. So I think if you want, the only way to get to where you want to go is to be honest about where you're currently at. And if you're honest with yourself and you're currently at, hey, this self criticism, like I have my imposter syndrome, the self criticism is high. You feel like you're making decisions from a place of fear and scarcity. Great. Like, let's be honest about that. Let's look at that. Like, what's at the root of that? And then that'll enable you to then get to where you want to go because you're being honest about where you're currently at. You can't get to where you want to go if you're not going to be honest about where you're currently at, because then there's no getting from A to B is impossible because you're not being honest about where you're starting from.
Yeah, being honest, I think that's a really tough one because there's so many layers there. So it's like for me, figuring out I was raised in a super religious home and it was never good enough and I'm always sinning. So I'm always feeling guilty. So this guilt, everything I do, it worked good when I want to work really hard, but now it doesn't work when you're leading other people because if I can't create, and this is my next question, if I can't create a culture of psychological safety, especially like you said, when we're being a scientist and experimenting, if I can't have psychological safety because I'm all fucked up in the head, then and I see this so many times is these leaders, it's like they're blind to who they are and these problems that they're having, they're just running victim, 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 and it's a lot of it could be based off the upstream problems, like you mentioned with the kids, can be based off these limiting beliefs, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. I think the way I like to describe imposter syndrome is there's a gap between your identity, like who you think you are, and your capabilities, like what you think you can do. And so if your identity is down here, but your capabilities are all the way up here, that's like imposter syndrome. And how do we look at that gap? I think to your point exactly is, especially as leaders, I think even as a coach too, right? Like we can only take people as far as we ourselves have gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially the case too in personal work. Like I always say when I'm starting with a client, two things. Number one, not all life coaching is not executive coaching, but all executive coaching has a part of life coaching in it. And I say that because I deeply believe the personal and the professional are deeply intertwined. Meaning if things are going on for you a certain way in your personal life, that's going to permeate the professional and vice versa. So if personally, like forget like professional, if even personally you are someone who is constantly criticizing yourself and you doubt yourself and nothing is ever good enough, you're a fool if you think you're not bringing that to work with you. And the sooner you can start having more of a growth mindset around yourself and what is possible for you and what is, it's not just you failed or you won, but, there's the gray, where am I learning, the better able you're going to be to bring that ethos to your team and the healthier your team and company are going to be.
Yeah, that's so good. And I know with this experimentation and embracing discomfort, and now we're into the self-awareness aspect of things. When we integrate the practice, so we're integrating the practice of like you said, and I think this is why everyone needs coaching, whether it's experimentation, embracing discomfort, training the scientist, operating these, or kind of like leaders are kind of like addicts. We'll do something until there's a problem, and then we just go back to our old way. It's like
Yeah.
we relapse, you know.
Yeah.
How you make it where it's not where it's long term.
Yeah. So I actually don't have like a magic answer here. I think it goes back to basics, which is if we go with not a silly, but maybe a more simple example, which is, you're someone who wants to work out in the morning and you want to be someone who does that. Well, I don't know, maybe for the first month, the first 3 months, you're going to create all kinds of like boundaries and parameters that make sure every morning you're waking up at a certain time and doing that thing. And usually, right, if the motivation and like these are all aligned, after a certain point, that just becomes now a way of being for you. You don't have to think
Mhm.
so much about it. It's just kind of like you've reprogrammed, you've created a new neural pathway. You've kind of
Mhm.
reprogrammed a part of your brain. And so there's this kind of chicken and egg thing where, we can say our identity shapes our behaviors, but also it's our behaviors and the actions we take in the outside world that then shift our identity and how we see ourselves. And so when it comes to like creating this change, right? In the beginning, it might look like, yeah, we're going to make sure like every week we're looking at this, or on a quarterly basis, we're going to be making sure like experiments and things like that are happening. And we're going to be like on each other's ass about it. And usually after a certain amount of time, that then just becomes the way of being.
Mhm.
But this also, I think, comes back to being honest with ourselves is how do we make sure we're not dropping the ball? How do we make sure we're doing what we're saying we're going to do and holding each other accountable? Sometimes that's why people hire coaches, right? If a CEO, it's hard. It can be hard. Of course, you answer to a board or maybe you have co-founders, but it can be hard. Like no one's always holding you accountable to certain, or holding up the mirror, I should say. And so that's sometimes also why people look for coaching, to really have someone holding up the mirror and along that quest with them as they're trying to make these big changes in themselves and their companies.
Yeah, that and I think that's so true, with what you're saying with coaching. And for leaders who are listening to this, who may feel inspired, but perhaps there's that other side of them that's overwhelmed by the idea of this like pretty deep transformation. What do you think is one manageable, actionable step that they can take? Like something today or this week to kind of unlock these new possibilities for themselves and their teams?
Great question. I would say one specific actionable thing they can do is to take out a pen and paper and make a list of everything they want, either for themselves or for their companies. Make a list of everything they want that they think is impossible. And that's it. Start there. And I offer that invitation because first of all, it's surprising how like we lack clarity. People
Mhm.
struggle to be clear about what they even want. Like what are we even working towards? What is the ideal outcome? Like okay, this is the current scenario, but like what's the actual ideal outcome here, or the ideal scenario? And if we allow ourselves to dream and put pen to paper about what do we actually want but think we can't have, it's a starting point to expand our realm of possibility, right? Oh, I want this, but I don't believe it's possible. Well, great.
Mhm.
Now we can start on a path of, well, how do we know that's not possible? What are some small, right? And you could
Right.
paving your way
Yes.
from
Yes.
there. But allowing yourself to write down, because we often stop ourselves of, we'll stop ourselves to only write down or share something that we think at the back of our minds is possible. We won't reach for what we feel is out of reach. And that's really, I mean, we want to expand our realm of possibility.
Yeah, that's so good. That's such a great one. I can't remember if I've ever done that. I'm gonna do that. I just wrote it down on this envelope. So while you were talking, I was like, yeah, I need to do that. That's awesome. Super excited about that. Okay, we're at 45 minutes. Arielle, that was awesome. I appreciate you. Appreciate the work that you're doing. How can people know it? Like, let's say a leader's listening to this and they're like, how can I find more information about you? What do you offer? All of those things. And I know you have a website and all that, but can you share the website and then how they can follow you?
Absolutely. So my website is www.newpo.io, NEWPO.io. You can find everything more about me and reach out to me there, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, whatever LinkedIn handle, Arielle Lechner.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. We'll make sure we
I
get
checked
in
the
this.
show
Well,
notes, but if you
tonight
type
I
in,
think Freddie you yesterday
yeah, 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 you did.
podcast.
You did.
Yeah, I need to go through all your stuff to kind of look at it and see for the questions
But
and stuff. But it would go ahead.
yeah, those are just the two places but
Okay,
best to
cool.
connect with me.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.